right. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the CMX Summit. Hello, hello. If you can hear me and see me, talk to me in the chat. Say hi. Let me know where you're tuning in from. My name is Seppi, rhymes with Peppy, and I'll be introducing our lovely speaker today. Just want to make sure everything is up and running before we hop in. Generally, we use the Q&A box for questions. It looks like it is open now. Great. Okay. So if you guys have any questions, we may have time at the end. Please drop them in the Q&A. Everybody, I'm going to bring our amazing speaker on. Let me just get the technology here ready. Please say hi in the comments below. Okay, looks like we're getting presenter mode on. All right. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us in the Advancing Queer Women in Business Through Community session with Kebone Moloko. So excited to have her here with us. Just gonna give you a quick little intro. Let me see, make sure, yes, we can see her on the screen there. Kebone is a collaboration enthusiast who thrives at bringing people and organizations together to build impactful partnerships. As the co-founder and CEO of the go-to African business and resource hub for queer women founders and leaders, Queer Women in Business and Allies, she is passionate about harnessing the power of community and technology to drive equity and inclusion in business. So if you guys could please join me in giving a big round of applause. Let me get a little track here. You can put some little claps in the comments there. I'm going to leave her to it. Kebone, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Seppi, for introducing me. I don't know if everyone can hear me. I want to do a quick check. If you can hear me, just give me a good shout out there in the chat, just so that I know that we're good to go. Thank you, Madeleine. Okay, great. So I'm so happy to be with all of you here today at the CMX Summit, virtually this time around, right? Thank you for joining. You know, I'm excited to spend the next kind of 20 to 25 minutes with you all, and hopefully we can engage via Q&A later. So as Seppi said, I am the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Queer Women in Business and Allies. We are essentially a business and resource hub that empowers and advances African queer women through access. Here in the Bay Area, I'm also a recruitment consultant at Robert Walters, which is a global specialist recruitment firm. And we basically partner with high growth VC-backed startups to help them find top talent here in the Bay. So during my talk, I am going to be sharing with you some learnings from 5 challenges that we've encountered in building our community from the ground up and initially with nothing. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with you. All right. Awesome. Right, I think everybody should be able to see that. Right, so as I said, I'm going to be sharing some takeaways that we've had along our journey. And just as, you know, something to note, it's really important to understand that like gender identity is complex, right, and fluid. When we do use the term queer woman X, we're really attempting, right, to be as inclusive as possible. Our community is also very inclusive of trans and non-binary persons. Now, before I kind of get into the story of how we built our community, let me take you back to my roots. I am proudly South African, born and bred, and I'm sure many of you, if you know South Africa, you know that we're a multicultural, diverse, and vibrant rainbow nation, which is actually our nickname. And I first spent kind of like the first 8 years of my life in a northwest town called Mafikeng. And this is essentially where I first experienced the spirit of Ubuntu. Now, I'm not talking about the Linux open source software, in case you're wondering. What I'm actually talking about is an African philosophy or mantra that we have. Umuntu, Bumuntu, Gabantu. I am because you are, in translation. Now, in my culture, there's a mutual understanding that we're all somehow connected and that one can only grow through the growth and progression of others in any given community. Now, some of the interesting and sometimes beautiful ways that the spirit of Ubuntu manifests in a community are, for example, as a child, every adult is your parent. If you're playing in the street after dark when you're not supposed to be and auntie so-and-so comes along, you know you're in trouble. If your neighbor runs out of onions or sugar or anything else, you're sometimes usually the first stop before a store run, and you give with no expectations of reciprocation. And most importantly, greeting someone is an acknowledgement of their existence. It's a sign of respect, and we are often taught to greet everyone we meet, even if they are strangers. So with this kind of childhood experience, you could imagine how connected I felt to my culture and my community. Yet as I grew up, I started to realize that even though I felt the strong sense of belonging, something was amiss, specifically in relation to my queer identity. Now, to give you a little bit of context, although South Africa is a forerunner in the fight to normalize and protect the LGBTQIA community on the African continent, there's still considerable disparities between the lived experiences of LGBTQIA persons and the laws that are in place to protect us. Now, my very important and aha moment actually happened when I came here to do my master's in San Francisco about 3 years ago. I'll never forget how I felt when I stood in a room full of hundreds of queer and non-binary professionals in tech at the Lesbians Who Tech Summit, who were proud and very openly supportive of one another. It was something I had never experienced before, specifically in a business environment. And so I told my co-founders, Sia and Buyelwa, about it. Now, as co-founders, the three of us, we are from different backgrounds. We have different career paths, and we've also had different lived experiences. But an essential thing that brought us together is that we face the same challenges related to the lack of belonging and support that we felt as queer women within the business environment. We knew that we wanted to create some kind of safe space of queer women in business in South Africa, but we knew we also couldn't just duplicate, right, the various Western models we were encountering, because even there are certain nuances in our business culture and socioeconomic circumstances that are completely different. To make matters even more challenging, in consulting with many others in the LGBTQIA space on the African continent, we were basically told that we wouldn't even find more than 500 queer women in business. Because I mean, of course, right, there's no way that there could be over 500 queer women in business on an entire African continent with like 1.2 billion people, right? Anyway, despite the skepticism, we were convinced that they were out there. And nonetheless, you could imagine the unknown and rather turbulent terrain that we knew we had ahead of us. Now, if I was going to attempt to tell you about all the challenges that we faced in building our community along the way, you'd probably miss the rest of the sessions today. So I think I'm just going to stick to the 5 key lessons that we've learned and the challenges we encountered and how we've been able to handle them. Excuse me. So, in addressing gender equality in her speech at the Women Deliver conference a few years ago, Melinda Gates spoke about the importance of closing the data gap for women and girls. What she said is, we cannot close the gender gap without first closing the data gap. We don't know enough about the barriers holding women and girls back, nor do we have sufficient information to track the progress against promises that have been made to women and girls. Similarly, the Queer Womanex data gap, as we refer to it internally, was the first challenge that we encountered. The first lesson we had in this was, when in doubt, talk to your community. We initially tirelessly searched the internet, trying to find some kind of validation that we were not the only ones experiencing the various intersectional challenges as queer women in business. We wanted to prove that the lack of the kind of experience that I had had in San Francisco was not because there were no professional entrepreneurial queer women like we were led to believe, but we also understood that it was due to the fact that there was a lack of visibility and representation because we were not being counted. This challenge proved to be a blessing in the end because it pushed us out of our comfort zone. We put out a call to every friend, cousin's friend that we knew was queer, and we asked them to bring their queer friends too, to our first community meetup in Cape Town. Our goal was to make sure that we bring about 30 queer women together in a room, get to know them, and hopefully have a better understanding of their pains, their challenges, their dreams, and their hopes. As an activity for this session, we took to human-centered design. We've definitely come to learn along the way that the best people to solve a problem are those with the first-hand experience of that problem. Now, our bring all of your queer friends and cousins call out to the community worked out pretty well. Instead of 30, we had about 50 queer women huddled in groups across the room, openly sharing about their experiences, empathizing with one another, ideating, creating prototypes based on solutions that they felt they needed. We had all kinds of realistic and some pretty futuristic ideas, but there was one common thread. Everyone in that room wanted to belong to a safe and inclusive group of supportive queer women. Now, following this first meetup in Cape Town, we did the same exercise at our next meetup in Johannesburg, now with 120 women. And that's when a pattern really started to appear. We found out that out of all the queer women, non-binary, and trans persons that we had met throughout that experience, 80% stated that our event was actually the first LGBTQIA business-centric event where more than 30% of attendees were women. 60% of them stated that the lack of access to funding and business resources had resulted in stunted business growth. And lastly, 80% of them expressed the challenges in finding, like identifying mentors who are queer too. Because queer women at the upper echelons of society are by and large invisible. Now, this is how we decided to embark on this journey to build our organization. We created our mission to empower and advance African queer women in business through access around these very pressing needs that we found. So don't forget to talk to your members. Number 2. To challenge the status quo, you need to be able to change perceptions. Now, with 2 successful events and a family of phenomenal queer women around us, we started planning a much larger event. We were super excited about being able to invite more queer women speakers into our community and showcase our community members across social media and advertise our summit so that we could get more buy-in. But we quickly realized that many of them were very reluctant to be put in the spotlight for fear of being discriminated against in their communities, or worse, their workplaces. Now, this was essentially a big challenge for our community. How are we going to encourage community engagement and participation if this was the case? For a start, we implemented a year-long social media campaign called Thriving Thursdays, and our goal was to reduce the impact of LGBTQIA stigma and make it a norm for queer women in business to be openly celebrated with consent, of course, and where it was safe to do so. We weren't just showcasing, famous queer women who are few and far between, but we showcased stories of real, everyday, small to medium business owners and everyday professionals, including creatives. And before we knew it, more and more women started to volunteer to have their stories told, and they expressed just how liberating it was to know that there were others. Now, our approach to solving this problem was not only through our social media campaign. We later also ended up partnering with enterprise resource group leaders at companies like Google and Uber, and explored ways in which queer women in their companies could be celebrated and endorsed, and as well as connected to our community. Number 3, it takes a tribe to build a tribe. Now, this is a mantra that we live by at QWBNA, and it really echoes the spirit of Ubuntu about how you have to be able to build your tribe in partnership with another. Even though we had many doors shut on us in the beginning phases of building our community, we had many more that were actually open to us. And one of those open doors was Hola Africa. This is a community that's focused on women-related sex and sexuality education content. And although Hola is not a business-centric community, we really found comfort in knowing that there was another organization that is catering to queer women in some way. And this was also at a time that we were really experiencing difficulties with being able to reach queer women in business pre-Thriving Thursdays. It only made sense then for us to be able to build a close and mutually beneficial cross-community partnership with Holla, and they welcomed us with open arms. We invited their members to our events and advertised some of their content across our social media, and similarly, they endorsed our community events and exposed us to more potential members than we would have ever been able to obtain with zero marketing spend. Now, number 4. Create value for your champions. By the end of the first year as an organization, our team was basically consisting of us 3 co-founders and 2 volunteers, and only one of us was full-time. As the core of our community started to grow across the country, we realized that we couldn't be in many places at once, nor could we be experts in every business subject matter. And so we approached this challenge in 2 ways. The first one was we appointed chapter leaders in 2 cities. These community champions were going to come in and save the day by building close-knit relationships with local community members, host events, create exactly the same safe experience that we had created before. And they did just that. That year, we hosted 4 times more events than we ever did, and we were more connected with our members than we ever had been before. At one point, almost 70% of all new attendees were referrals. You're probably wondering where the challenge is in all this, right? Well, I must admit, we made a huge mistake. We ended up treating our beloved champions like they were just part of the founding team and forgot that they too were our members who needed to be nurtured, trained, motivated, and rewarded in some way. This was a hard lesson for us because some of them lost their fire along the way. So to solve this, we designed a chapter leader onboarding and training program and offered personal development incentives. The result so far has been a more enthusiastic chapter leader team and community who are generously giving of their time to serve and engage with our community. Now, for a nonprofit like ours, creating full training programs and mentoring our team is a little tough to do since we're so resource strapped. So the way in which we tackled this was through our advisory board. We have a group of passionate and talented captains of industry who each mentor a member of our team on a monthly basis and provide business coaching for founders within our community. Our advisors are our biggest advocates and endorsers, and in their respective industries, they are always keen and open to refer valuable connections to our community. And this program has now quickly become a very mutual beneficial and personal development value exchange. Last, but certainly not least, number 5, listen. At the beginning of 2020, we had grown our community to 3 chapters across 3 cities with the goal of launching a new one in another African market this year. Our members were still buzzing from the experience that we had at the 2019 summit in November, and we were excited for more to come this year. But of course, you know what happened. All of a sudden, like everyone else, we had to turn 100% virtual, something we were accustomed to as a team, but not as much as a community. As a result, the close connections that we always were able to make with our community at our in-person events were not the same anymore. Of course, this was primarily due to the fact that everyone's lives had been turned upside down and that mental health became the most urgent and critical challenge in our community. This was specifically amongst members of our community who were now expected to quarantine in family environments where they were not safe and people weren't accepting of who they are. Recognizing this and the fact that we were in no way equipped to handle the subject matter, we turned to a fellow organization that's LGBTQIA centric and focuses on providing mental health services to our community called QueerWell. In conjunction with our virtual business events, we collaboratively hosted virtual mental health sessions that some of our members referred to as their weekly lifeline. And as a result, we've seen the highest increase in just support and loyalty as a team even from our members. This really taught us that it's really important to remember that your community members are people at the end of the day, and that they may have needs beyond the scope of your community activities. You might not be able to provide everything they need for them, but it's important to understand that even the smallest gestures can impact their lives for the better. And as a result, they'll build a deeper, trusting and belonging in the community. Now, I started this talk by kind of taking you back to my roots and sharing about how the spirit of Ubuntu connects us beautifully as a community in South Africa. And yet, growing up, I still felt like something was missing. At QWBNA, we believe that we have the power to make a change. We didn't wait for the next organization to challenge the status quo. It started with us three, queer women from different walks of life with one goal: to create a safe space and inclusive community where queer women in business are empowered and advanced through access to each other, through fruitful business opportunities, and of course, through like-identifying mentors who are fueling their journeys with guidance. Today, we are a thriving network of over 1,000 queer women, trans and non-binary entrepreneurs, including our supportive allies and working professionals too. And collectively, we are fulfilling this very same mission. We have been able to accelerate 30 queer women-owned businesses, funded 7 of them, and been able to provide mentorship on a monthly basis for some. As I shared in the beginning, we've had our fair share of challenges, but we've overcome each and every single one together. So if there's only one thing that you take from this talk today is, please remember, umuntu, ngumuntu, ngabantu. In a community, I am because you are. Thank you. I think I'm gonna call Seppi back now.
Yes. Big virtual round of applause, everybody. Kebone, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Yes, let us know in the chat. Put those clapping hands emojis. Let us know there. Send your love. All right, we have a few minutes for questions. So if you have any, please drop them in the Q&A box. I see one already in there, so I'm going to go straight there. Kebone, Kate Sassoon asks, how do you recruit your industry mentors while still being sensitive to the potential for stigma and reputational risk?
That's a really important question. Thank you for that. It's a multi-tiered, right, kind of answer with that. I think the first thing is what we started doing initially was we actually went by the connections that we already had, right? So the safety in knowing that there's somebody that you know that is also either queer or a queer ally. We explicitly and openly are very intentional about how we communicate our organizational message to our potential mentors, our potential sponsors as well. And that's something that we really extensively ensure that if anybody is going to come into our community, they're very aware of themselves. They're aware of possibly the privilege that they walk into the community with. And we, of course, kind of provide supportive materials. We have a code of conduct that we, of course, discuss with them. And it's really a continuous effort, I would say. It's a continuous learning effort for us, as well as, of course, the mentors and the industry professionals who come into our space.
Great, thank you. All right, I see another question here. I saw it in the general session chat, or sorry, in the session chat. So Kelsey Bass has a question. She says, how did your organization fundraise?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Chelsea. Various ways. I will say, like I said in the beginning, we started with nothing. You know, we actually hosted our first event by literally bargaining with everyone, every vendor that we could come across, right? Fortunately, the event space, for example, that we found was a new event space that needed traction and needed a lot of foot traffic into the space. And so we were able to, you know, kind of communicate with them and explain of how we're able to bring 30 to 50 women into a room, and that kind of gives you awareness, right? Along the way, we recognized that we had to kind of focus a lot more on our fundraising as a nonprofit organization, and we've done it all. We've done crowdfunding kind of campaigns on Global Giving, which is a really great platform. They're very supportive. They've got really access to a lot of tools and resources that you may need as a nonprofit to understand what it requires of you to be able to run a crowdfunding campaign. We've also raised funds through foundations, of course. We've got a local foundation called the Other Foundation in Southern Africa that actually provides funds for LGBTQIA-based businesses. And we've also reached out and tapped into international foundations and organizations. A great part of where, you know, some of the funding that we've raise comes from as well is via, you know, private donors and people who just really believe in our mission and want to put their money towards the impact that we're creating.
Wonderful. And let's see, we may have a time for one or two more. So I'm going to take another question here from Kate. She says, aside from homophobia and heterosexism, what is the biggest challenge your community has faced so far?
Good question. I think there are so many. I think initially as an organization, and I think I mentioned a little bit in my talk, is there was actually, interestingly enough, resistance that came from within our LGBT community, which we didn't expect. I think historically, a lot of the activities and events that were centered around the LGBT community were usually either social related, you know, parties, events, and the fun aspect of things. What we did was kind of build something that was the first of its kind, specifically catering to queer women in business. And so we definitely were experiencing a lot of resistance in that sense. It was about now, how do we approach it in such a way that we're able to show a different possibility and possibly change behavior as well?
Great. All right. And last question, Amber's question here. Amber says, it's great to hear that after some hard learnings, you now have a structure for building your champions. How do you identify them in particular?
Thanks for that, Amber. To be honest, I think this is something that we have always gone by. It's important for us to invite people into our community that put their hands up in the first place. I think we've always gone by that, right? Initially, in the beginning, we had identified people that we had met at our previous events who actually asked us, like, how do I get involved? In the beginning, we didn't know how to have them come into our space and be involved, but we quickly realized that actually this community needs to be driven by the people who are in it, right? As time has gone by, we do, I mean, of course, advertise across our social media or our newsletters, but it really is with regards to either having people to be being referred to our network or people who voluntarily put their hands up, because those are the people that we believe are truly the ones that are fired up and are ready to roll up their sleeves and kind of hit the ground running in terms of building this community that we're doing.
Amazing. All right. I know you have to run, Kebone. So everybody, just one more round of applause here for our amazing speaker. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, everyone who attended this event. I do want to let people know, if you're interested in a little yoga session, that is coming up next. If you want to have a mindful stretching with Lauren Terrace, go ahead and do that during the break, and also check out to see what events are coming up. You can go to the photo booth, take some photos there, check out the different shops and the bookstore. And I will see you guys in the next session. So thank you again, Kebone, and have a great one.
Have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.